What's this episode about, Charity?
Lawsuits, baby! In today's episode of Oops, I'm in a Cult, we are covering the lawsuits that were filed in 2019 and 2020. 5 lawsuits were filed involving 6 plaintiffs, and they were filed against various church entities of the Living Word. So Church of the Living Word, the local church in North Hills, California, the Living Word, which was the publishing corporation, also located in California, and our BFF, Gary Hargrave, the infamous religious leader who we know and hate.
Documents have been released that are connected to those, and we are going to be looking at what is in that and what that means on this latest episode. Oops, I'm in a Cult, Living Word Fellowship, lawsuits.
Yeah.
Are you ready, or are you still putting your makeup on? Like, are we...
It's chapstick!
Welcome to the whatever podcast this is.
Are we going to change the title, or are we good with...
We love Oops, I'm in a Cult.
What is this podcast about, though, Charity?
John Robert Stevens.
The Living Word.
The Walk.
It's cults. It's cons.
And corn. It's heavy. Like, actually, just working on this episode and reading everything has been really heavy. Because so much of it I didn't even know. Like, there's a lot of shit I knew, but some of this was so much worse.
You're going to watch as 2 former cult members try to de-dumbify themselves by doing a podcast about the cult that they were involved in their entire life.
Thought it was a church, turned out it was a cult. Oh, there's a good tagline.
That's what it is. That's it.
Oops, I'm in a cult. A little trigger warning at the top here. We are going to be discussing sexual abuse of minors, not in detail, but it is discussed here. So just be forewarned that if you have sensitivity towards that, just proceed with caution.
Okay, like we said in our intro here, we will be talking today about the lawsuits that have just finished. Earlier this year, a couple months ago, officially, we had got a dump of documents. We have been going through what is available on the court website regarding these lawsuits that were filed in 2019 and 2020 against the Living Word Fellowship, more specifically, Church of the Living Word, Hargrave, and Hargrave Family Ministries, and the Apostolic Company, and of course, TLW and the Publishing Corp. In there. The 4 lawsuits that were filed in Los Angeles County is what we're going to be focusing on here. There is a story being told through these documents, a lot of details, and we'll kind of lay that out here. All of what we're talking about here, most 98% of it, whatever, has to do with sexual abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and we are not discussing in detail that sexual abuse.
Just out of sensitivity toward
the
victims, yeah.
Yeah, because it's a lot. And we are not mentioning names as well of even the plaintiffs. The only names we mention are the ones that we typically mention, which is Gary Hargrave, Marilyn Hargrave, John Robert Stevens, Rick Holbrook.
One of the plaintiffs' complaints says this is an action for negligence, negligent hiring, negligent failure to warn, sexual battery, and sexual harassment. This is basically the same for all of the plaintiffs' complaints. Shalom did end up being one of the plaintiffs. However, we're focusing in on just 2 of the other cases here because these are the documents we were able to get. And not only do they include excerpts from Shalom and other plaintiffs' depositions and evidence in their particular cases, they also reveal very obvious common threads showing that everybody's case seemed to corroborate everybody else's. So
yeah, that's right.
This is basically just cases of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and negligence in all of them. So, yeah. And ultimately the Zalkin law firm represented the plaintiffs as well as Lindsay Gallagher of Gallagher Law, who you'll recognize her name. She was also a former member who from the beginning has advocated for the victims and did end up as co-counsel. So,
yeah, that's really exciting. I mean, it's really interesting to see that in this. And I think something we didn't mention before in our episode of Gary Hargrave's deposition, her name shows up in the transcript there too. She's not the one deposing, the lawyer actually sitting across asking the questions to Gary. She's not that lawyer, but she does appear, to be in the room, which just to me is a whole level of like, wow, that's fucking awesome. That must have pissed Gary off, you know?
Yes, to be able to sit there and look at Gary in the eye and in that role, so satisfying.
So it's very clear how involved she is in this as we go through these documents. Her name's at the bottom right there with the Zalkin team. And so to see that she's all up in this is a really cool thing. And obviously, I'm sure helped a lot in the lawsuit itself. One more note on this. So as we kind of went through these documents, the other thing we noticed is that these 4 cases that we're talking about, the Los Angeles cases, they all seem to have a notice of settlement filed. There's not a lot of detail on like what that means, but I think you'll see what it could mean by the time we get to the end of this episode and how that all lays out. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at mostly we're pulling all this information from 2 different documents that were filed. One of them is the points and authorities. And then the other one is a tentative judgment written
a
by
tentative
the judge.
Judgment by the judge based on, so the defendant who is Gary Hargrave et al. Et al. Means like, et cetera, whatever, filed a motion for summary judgment. And so again, like just a caveat here, or a, what do I want to call it? Like a disclaimer. Sorry, we're not lawyers. I did work as a legal assistant for a few years, but I am by no means.
I've seen a couple episodes of Law and Order, so
So we like basically know what we're talking about. No, we did our best here, but please do not just don't rely on us to say everything properly. We really have done research and tried to get it all right. But okay, that being said, a motion for summary judgment is a pretrial request that a party in a civil case can file to ask the court to end the case without a trial. So basically, it replaces the function of a trial if there is no dispute of fact.
Yeah.
So that was the defendant, in this case, the church entities and the church leader, Gary Hargrave, did file a motion hoping for that. And then in response, the plaintiff's attorneys file what's called a memorandum of points and authorities. And that is a really fun document to read. Well, they're both fun because the P&A outlines basically all of the allegations, right?
Yeah. So instead of like the arguing, like the picture 2 lawyers in court, like one gets up and makes an argument, the other one gets up. It's just documents getting filed, making these arguments back and forth, trying not to go to court, trying not to deal with juries, et cetera, et cetera. And so, what's interesting is, like Charity said, the memorandum of points and authorities, especially in this case, especially what we're looking at here, the document that we have that goes through there, just kind of lays it all out, and it's all based off of fact.
Yes,
right? Like
and
it's all based off
undisputed
of
fact.
Yeah, things that have been discovered in, for example, the depositions or in discovery with the documents and the and the evidence that kind of came through in this like fact-finding mission that happens as part of the case.
And basically, if the motion for summary judgment is granted, then the court will make a decision on the case without a trial. So our gathering, and maybe it's too soon to say, but our gathering from this was that, well, you'll see.
Well, that's what you'll see. You'll see what happens, because then we have the tentative judgment, which we're looking at after this. And the tentative judgment, again, it's tentative. Tentative ruling. Yeah. It's not necessarily like this is the official, but that's where the paper trail ends of these court filings. And the next thing is notice of settlement. Yeah. So I think that kind of lays it out there. But what we're going to do, the thing that's really interesting in this is the details of this points and authorities, and then the judge's basically opinions response to all this stuff. And these 2 documents really do technically only concern 2 different plaintiffs. So remember we said there were 4 before. It's 2 of the latest issues. So, for example, Shalom, we all know Shalom's story. She was one of the plaintiffs. A lot of her stuff is in here, but it's not her case that the points and authorities are actually pointing to. it's all related, like we said. What was that thing that we said? It's that like
the common threads were obvious between all the cases, or among all the cases.
Exactly. So you'll see that we're focusing on two, and these actually both largely circle around the CLW, TLW church, and the school, the Centers of Learning, small, private, Christian, neighborhood, teeny, little, baby, innocent school. Centers around that. I am a graduate of that unaccredited high school.
Sorry about that.
We're laughing, but it's actually really, 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 really not funny.
No, because it just becomes very apparent in reading all of this how messed up that whole school was. Negligent, really. And this memorandum of points and authorities. So the motion for summary judgment relates to one plaintiff. The points and authorities relate to another plaintiff. But again, it's kind of all saying the same things. Yeah. So the memorandum of points and authorities, it's a trial brief. It's a legal document that the plaintiff's lawyers filed to support or to their motion or to argue a legal issue. In this case, it's like saying, the motion for summary judgment, the defendant is trying to say, we're not responsible. Like there's no triable issue here. And the memorandum of points and authorities comes back and says, we're going to argue all these points as to why there are triable issues here. So should we get going on the P&A? Okay.
Yeah, let's go on the P&A. So I hope that helps. If it's confusing,
remember we didn't go to law school. So.
Please Google it, But I think in some places, especially later, right now we're running through some of the stuff. It's pretty straightforward and pretty clear and understandable. But later it gets a little confusing. Like the judge is not going to ever say in a civil case like this is not going to be like, you are guilty or not guilty. Yeah. It's not, you're innocent, you're guilty. It's none of that. And the phrasing of like what is it for summary judgment? What is that thing called? Where like the motion for summary judgment that the defendants are asking for, like the church is like, hey, motion for summary judgment. It's denied or granted is kind of the phrasing. And so it can seem a little confusing. We'll do our best to like basically make that into a you bad, you not bad, or guilty, not guilty, essentially, but understand this is a civil case. So that's not what's happening here. It's not guilty, not, that kind of conversation is not happening. Sure. But let's get into the points of authorities because there's a lot of really interesting things here. And again, want to underline backed up by evidence. And I will say that there is, when you look through the court documents, and when you're reading this, they have to cite all that evidence. So it's all in parentheses next to the claim in this, and it's all cited by, evidence in there. And it points to like a organizational chart. Yeah, the exhibits and stuff. And that list that it's pointing to is 1,300 pages long. So these points and authorities are pointing to their list of evidence that is 1,300 pages long. We did not download that because that would cost $1,300 essentially, or not quite that much, but like $600 or $700 to download. So we're just trusting on the infrastructure here of our court system that it's all proven. Let's kick it off.
Let's kick it off. Introduction. This was the introduction in the P&A. So just for background, the Living Word Fellowship is a religious cult that exerted ultimate control over its members through a rigid hierarchical power structure created and maintained for the glorification of the cult leader and his inner circle. Control was effectuated in part through the fellowship's demand of submission by members to its leaders. For decades, the Living Word Fellowship knew of the risks posed by sexual predators within and did nothing to protect its minor congregants, including plaintiff. So that's the summary here. We want to talk about special relationships. This is like a legal term, or
it's one of the things that they argue, of like part of the reason that a defendant would be responsible in a civil case is because they have a quote special relationship with either the perpetrators or the plaintiffs?
So a special relationship exists where a plaintiff is particularly vulnerable and dependent upon a defendant, and that defendant has some control over that plaintiff's welfare. So of course this applies in this situation, because the plaintiff's lawyers are proving, which we all know as former members, that the shepherding / designated relationship system of control in the church constituted a special relationship, and therefore leadership did have a responsibility to protect minors from sexual abuse.
Yeah, and I think that's something we've covered 1,000 times in this podcast, is the designated relationship system of control, the shepherding, Elisha, all that stuff, and they kind of lay that out, and you'll see some of that pop up here and there in what we're quoting, but it's like. So when they talk about special relationship, you can just think like a doy, and it's great. Yeah. It's another one of those like in court record now, so it's very cool. Okay. So let's look at this next thing with the culture of sexual abuse.
Yes. So the attorneys here outline the culture of sexual abuse within the fellowship and cite specific examples. For example, John Stevens and Marilyn took Rick Holbrook and minors to purchase pornography. Leaders, including Stevens, Marilyn, and Holbrook, Rick, would openly compare the nude women's bodies to the bodies of minor girls in the fellowship, these women in the pornography magazines, including their legs, vaginas, and even pubic hair growth. A multitude of victims reported being sexually abused and were ignored, shunned, and silenced, including specifically by Stevens, Gary and Marilyn Hargrave, and Holbrook. Holbrook had a well-known history of sexually abusing minor females as young as the age of 8. When the abuse was reported to Hargrave, he laughed about it, took no corrective action, and allowed Holbrook to retain his positions multiple of authority, including over Church of the Living Word, the Living Word building, and to have unfettered access to minors. Holbrook went on to sexually harass and abuse dozens of women, including the plaintiff when she was a minor between 1984 and 2018.
Yeah. So
you want to continue on to the?
We could continue on. There's more, but like like what you're saying in there is something that like we haven't covered really on this podcast.
We've covered the subsequent part here where we're talking about the culture of silencing and shaming. We've
the culture of silence, but Holbrook had a well-known history of sexually abusing minor females at the age of 8 is something we have not talked about on here. Right. Is not something that is like out there and floating around. I mean, it's probably rumored or whatever. Some people have heard it as former members or whatever, but that's something we have not covered at all. And it's saying it in here. And again, remember, we just said like this comes from a place of fact. It's something that they depositions were taken. And on top of that, the thing that is really shocking to me is just this little window here. It says when the abuse was reported to Hargrave, he laughed about it, took no corrective action, and allowed Holbrook to retain his positions. That he laughed about it. The story is outlined in one of the depositions. He received a letter from a mother who was concerned over the sexual harassment and abuse of her 8-year-old daughter, her young daughter.
Yeah.
And they received that letter and they were sitting around a pool. It was Gary and Marilyn sitting around a pool, and they were reading it and making fun of it. Yeah, or jacuzzi or something. It was their backyard. They were sitting around and making fun of it.
Making fun of it. Just so callous.
It's so callous. It's something that let's go on. Do you want me to read this next bit?
Sure. This is continuing on the culture of sexual abuse.
Yeah. The general response was to silence victims, discourage reports to law enforcement, or praise decisions not to report, shun victims, and protect perpetrators as a means of protecting the cult itself. For example, when one member reported that Hargrave's chef raped her, she was thanked for not reporting to law enforcement. Does that sound familiar, Charity?
Yeah.
We
sounds like
interviewed
Lauren's
this person.
Case. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was no consequence to her assailant. This is something that we had talked about with Lauren in our interview with her. When another congregant disclosed her years-long abuse by older children who were babysitting her beginning in 1980 while attending the Shiloh Church school, to her teacher and principal, she was told she was being dramatic several years later, she disclosed the abuse to APCO leaders, Apostolic Company leaders, the church oversight committee. The leader told her, "Oh my God, get over it. That happens to everybody." And then disclosed that John Stevens abused her, the leader. The culture within the fellowship was to ignore, dismiss, conceal, avoid, and cover up sexual abuse. Yeah. And that's something we've seen a number of times in our conversations with people on here. But there's so many, it's so jam-packed, like a paragraph like that is so jam-packed. And again, they're just like using this as background, right? It's not even, this isn't even the case. This isn't
this is the general culture of the fellowship.
This is the general culture. This is a leader who was promoted to leadership after being sexually abused by the founder.
Right.
And was like, it's not a big deal. Like, get over it. And it kind of, you can see that in this stuff of like, well, yeah, that makes sense then that she would get promoted because she's telling other people to not get out. She's telling herself, get over it. Right. You know, whatever, it happens.
The guru
Even John
told her to
Stevens
get
did it to
over
me.
it.
So like,
right. Jeez, it's so sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this gets into a little bit of our details of, the point of this
case. Yeah. So this involved, a large portion of this case involved abuse of a minor by a teacher at Centers of Learning, the church school, which was also open to the public, but was run primarily by church members, and it was overseen by the church. Yeah.
How are you feeling? You're tired. I can feel it in you.
It's more, I feel nervous.
What are you nervous about?
Getting this right.
Oh.
I feel like just a sense of responsibility to like represent these plaintiffs well. Because they've already been through so much and I just want to get it right, you know? It's heavy. Like actually just working on this episode and reading everything has been really heavy. Because so much of it I didn't even know. Like there's a lot of shit I knew, but some of this was so much worse than I could have imagined. So it just feels like a lot of responsibility to get it right.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've been working on this for a while and we read the lawsuits before when they were originally filed. And have kind of tucked that away until now. And then just spent, a couple weeks or days or I don't know, whatever it's been on and off for the past little bit, trying to rummage through all of this and reading depositions and details and things in there. And it is infuriating. And I didn't realize, we've had this, it can be summed up in so many ways that has not been summed up. But like, there's the negligent part of it that feels very like, no one cared about us. They made this, everybody was so focused on the mission that they did not care what was happening anywhere else. As it says somewhere in the documents here and the lawsuits and stuff is that like, John Stevens created the school as a way of teaching his belief system. That was its sole purpose, was to raise up prophets and blah, 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 blah. But it was for the mission. And then to see these things happening with the children at the school that I went to with people whose names I know and was friends with and connected to and around and all of this stuff with teachers and principals who were my teachers. And in this world that like you go, why they didn't care. And this is the overarching thing. This isn't even the details of it. This isn't even the most nefarious version of events, of what could be happening. But just the very basics of like, they didn't give a shit that this stuff was happening. And what shows in here and what we're still working to get into is how they actively covered it up. And, we can drag the top leaders all we want, but it's like all the way down the line.
All the way
There
down
are
the
people
line,
that were put on the front lines who in any other scenario, any other community, you would expect would be the first ones to stand up for the kids, are the last ones to stand up for the kids, and the first ones to stand up to protect leadership and protect abusers. And you wondered, like Charity, you said before when we were going through this, like people were kicked out for nothing. They were kicked out of the community, ostracized, cut off from their family for nothing. Yeah. And yet these abusers
just for not being submissive enough.
Yeah, and these abusers get chance after chance after chance.
Yes. Which what does that spell out to you? To me, it spells out that they were doing that on purpose. They were creating an environment for sexual predators. And that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Even Rick Holbrook, I mean, he's like the classic example of like our interview with Titus. I re-listened to that recently. He gets kicked out for doing like normal 23-year-old shit, and it ruins his life for a long time. Rick is abused an 8-year-old girl sexually. Gary and Marilyn knew about it. He goes on to continue to abuse, and he gets put back into positions, not only let in the church again, put into positions of authority again and again and again. And it infuriates me. How many dead bodies along the way for this mission? And I'm starting to wonder, did they even have a mission, or were they just fucking around, abusing children, partying? Like, what was actually happening? Did they even believe in this stuff? Yeah. Because from everything that I see now, seems like they didn't give a shit. It was just a money-making, party-having, heyday for that. I could go on, but we have a lot to cover.
We do have a lot to cover. But that's exactly it. And like, we're stopping it here just because we can't even make it to the main meat of this thing. We've done it a number of times, and we're trying to get it accurate, and say it accurately and get it in the right way, because this is legal stuff. That's what they're doing. That's what these documents do, is they're trying to be accurate. Yeah. And that's good. And we want the same thing. We're trying to pass this information along to you, but it's just, okay.
This podcast is brought to you by us, your friendly neighborhood Cult-Busters.
Oops, I'm in an advertisement. If you'd like to support our efforts and access exclusive bonus content,
like behind-the-scenes conversations,
let's put this behind us.
Access to our research and more,
head over to Supercast, where you can subscribe monthly or yearly.
It's exclusive, it's personal, it's behind the scenes.
All about the living word cult.
Going to the records department, trying to get filings for John Robert Stevens' divorce.
This is an unskippable advertisement.
Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the episode. So
okay,
plaintiff number one.
This is plaintiff number one. Get us going, Charity. What does this actually say here?
The details. This details minor abuse by a member of the church who was originally abused her in the capacity of a babysitter, a fellow church member and babysitter, who was then later hired as a teacher at Centers of Learning, the church school. And the details show that for years subsequent to being hired as a teacher, he was reported for inappropriate behavior in his role in the classroom.
Yes.
I should mention that this abuse that she suffered at his hands when he was babysitting her was reported to the leadership of the Apostolic Company, including a leader who was the principal of the school. Mm-hmm. So this minor girl had reported it to her mother. Her mother reported it to the Apostolic Company. They dismissed the allegation and went on to hire him as a teacher.
Just a couple years later. Mm-hmm. Those details are listed in here. So we're going to get in through here. It gets a little confusing too, because there are two characters that like play the same role, but they are two different people. We call them church leader / principal 1 and church leader / principal 2. Mm-hmm. And at different times they play the role of principal, but they are both connected to the Apostolic Company and on positions in that area. So just so you understand what's happening there. Okay. Let's just start. We got to read this stuff, guys. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. The point 1, I'll do point 2, and we'll just get it going.
So this is quoted. They dismissed the allegation, and Holbrook and church leader / principal 2 told the plaintiff's mother not to report the abuse to law enforcement as mandated by law. That is, they are mandatory reporters as teachers.
Right. The perpetrator was then hired by church leader / principal 2 to teach at the church school despite knowing the allegations against him. He had no teaching experience, was not credentialed, and didn't even have a college degree. Here's my favorite line from it. There were no minimum requirements to be employed at the church school.
Which that exemplifies right there. He was a teacher there for 23 years without even having a college degree.
That's right. And I went back to the church leader / principal 2 thing. That principal 2, they're done in order. So principal 1, then it was principal 2. Those that know, I want you to know.
Chronologically, like when, who was principal when.
Right.
Okay, so this teacher, we're going to refer to the perpetrator as teacher from here on out, routinely asked about the personal lives of his students, including who was dating who, and spoke openly about the sex lives of his students, asking, quote, how far they had gone with their respective partners. This teacher spoke openly about different sex positions. These conversations never happened in the context of a sex education course or in an academic setting. He made salacious and shaming comments regarding the appearance and dress of his students, including statements like, your butt is hanging out, or what are you trying to do, show off to everyone? He also commented on the development of his female students' breasts during class. These comments were made on a weekly basis in the classroom, hallways, in the field, at lunchtime, and during PE class. The teacher also commented on the buttocks of his students and frequently called some of his students hoochies. And then there's some specifically documented incidents from his personnel file that date back to 1999.
And we're going to hang on to this for a little cliffhanger because I just wanted to add stuff on that last.
Okay.
He was my teacher in junior high and high school.
Did he call you a hoochie?
No, but that is 100% a word that he would use. He was very much so the cool teacher. He was the one that like picked favorites. All of this stuff, it all like checks out from our experience. From my experience, I've heard from others as well, like saying the same kind of thing.
Interesting. So none of this was surprising to you to hear because you'd heard it.
Yeah, and we knew he would. Like if we didn't want to do, he taught like geometry or math, history, things like that. If we didn't want to do class, we knew that we could kickstart an interesting conversation that would distract for the entire period by mentioning something like Friends, like the TV show Friends. And then from there, you'd get into things about the personal sex lives of students and things like that would totally deviate. And like that was, us as children just not wanting to be a part of class. And then it turned into places where kids would get singled out and made fun of, or pried into their sex lives or whatever. It's just, just starting there, it's inappropriate, right?
Yeah.
Let's go on to the specific incidences, like what you just said. These are some specifically documented incidents from his personnel file, which I didn't know these were documented things back then, that date back to 1999. No termination, which means that Principal 2 had reports of this and documented it.
Yeah, we looked at them ourselves in the exhibits. They have scans of it in the
Okay,
I recognize her handwriting too.
Yeah, you even know you see the handwriting.
I know her handwriting because she was my pastor.
That's right.
So these are just several things that were in the personnel file that the teacher had been reported to do. Talks about masturbation, talks about whether girls' breasts would hold paper up, talks about girls' genitalia. Oh God. Talks about how girls' genitalia has a particular or different smell. Can they stand and urinate? Suggested to a student that we/you should chop off your penis. That would be funny. Everyday sexual references in class. Very often, several girls. Talking about a professor who got disciplined for sexual talk and defending him. Doggy style and gay sex, use of foul language in the classroom. These are just a few. Mm-hmm. These were years worth of things.
Yeah. And doggy style and gay sex was actually the what would I call it? Like the more milder conversations that would happen when it came to sex positions and things. Think of
This
like
was in your experience?
in my
class with
experience.
them?
Yeah.
Wow.
Think of like a really disgusting sex act. Yeah. That would be talked about
Wow.
in detail, analyzed
To teenagers.
Analyzed, questioned. The nature of like, did people actually do it? Those kind of things. Just really, 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 really detailed conversations.
Wow.
Okay. So that's this teacher who was a teacher in the school hired. And that's what's like such a question to me that's so interesting. It's like brings back to like what we were just talking about before we went through this is like, why? Not credentialed,
why? I mean,
not
right,
educated, did not fit. And I think again, like I like to look at like the innocent version and then the innocent version answer to that question. And the nefarious one, which the nefarious one we kind of covered with the idea of just like, well, they're promoting predators, they're breeding predators, they're creating this environment on purpose. They love that it's helping to groom people so that someone like our next perpetrator, Rick Holbrook, can come in and swoop him up and make him his next wife. That's a nefarious version of it. The innocent side of it is like the school was cheap. They barely paid anybody, any of the teachers enough. So this guy who's got no qualifications whatsoever to be a teacher and is causing all these problems, you make an excuse to keep him in because like, what are you going to do? How are you going to replace that? You can't.
No one will work for the pittance that he was making.
Yeah. And the thing that we haven't mentioned, he was very smart. He was, by all accounts, from what I gathered, like a very good student when he was at the school. Really great, expert at math, all of this stuff, just a really great intellect.
Sure, but in the real world, like you can't be a teacher just because you're smart,
Right, yeah. I agree. So,
and especially when you have, 20 plus years worth of reprimands for being sexually inappropriate with your students, like that would not fly in the real world.
That's right. Okay, so then we got our other perpetrator, Rick Holbrook.
The plaintiff alleges that Rick Holbrook also sexually abused her. Holbrook was allegedly the most prolific sexual abuser within the fellowship.
This is, I mean, allegedly, again, that's a quote from the Points and Authorities that cites all the evidence and like the list. It doesn't
even say allegedly. I just bopped that in.
Yeah, she bopped that in.
I bopped that in.
Yeah, it says that Holbrook was the most prolific sexual abuser within the fellowship is the actual quote. And like the reason that they're able to say that is because of the piles of evidence that they have to back that up. Go ahead.
Just to protect ourselves, I'll say these are all the allegations, okay?
Yes, of course. Of course.
This is continuing from the Points and Authorities. He brutally molested a minor between the ages of 8 and 13. Again, as we said before, Hargrave was personally notified of the abuse in 1984 and dismissed it. Mm-hmm. He was insulated from discipline and went on to sexually abuse countless minors in the Living Word Fellowship, served them alcohol at parties, and was nonetheless retained as a pastor and commissioned as an overseer for the Apostolic Company. The Points and Authorities detail these specific incidents of sexual abuse, but we won't be reading that out of respect for the plaintiff.
They detail it in detail, and there's a lot, and it really makes the case. I think for this, it just makes a ton of sense. It's sexual abuse.
That is very detailed and so it's just sensitive. We didn't feel it would be appropriate to read those details.
To air it all out. Yeah. Because there are still plaintiffs that exist and are people and don't need this all dragged.
Yeah.
Go on.
So the plaintiff exhibited red flags as a student at the school. Any one of these instances of inappropriate conduct should have raised a reasonable suspicion that the plaintiff may be experiencing some sort of sexual abuse, but the church and the school, under the Apostolic Company's oversight, did nothing. So she was basically exhibiting red flag behavior at school, over-sexualized behavior. This is typically a red flag that a child is being sexually abused. The Apostolic Company's employees and agents, including the employees and agents of Church of the Living Word and Centers of Learning who worked under the Apostolic Company, oversight, failed to exercise ordinary care in their supervision of plaintiff and perpetrators. The Apostolic Company is liable for the negligence of its employees, which in turn led to the sexual abuse of the plaintiff.
Okay. So again, that's the plaintiff's lawyers, Zalkin and Gallagher, making that statement in there, which is really, really great. What I want to know, I'm just adding this in now, the incidents, the red flags, the church and school, and the Apostolic Company having a responsibility and then not doing anything. I'm not sure if I remember where I read this from, but I definitely know from like going through the depositions and things like that, that the lawyers take pains to make sure to ask the teachers what kind of training they had, different Apostolic Company members, what kind of training was there in the church to notice sexual abuse and things like that. And the teachers and teachers, mostly it's the principals that we're talking about in here. They say that they're required, that social services or social workers or whoever by the state or county come by because they're a school. They're required to take tests and like little classes on noticing this stuff. And what we see eventually in these documents too is they know about that because based on their actions, which we will cover in a second, but it just shows that they were educated on these things. They were required to be educated on these things, and yet they didn't do anything about it.
Right. So they can't claim ignorance.
Yes, they can't claim ignorance and really this, all sorts of issues there. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. So the attorney goes on to say the defendants ratified Holbrook's conduct, meaning basically condoned it, when they failed to investigate. Yeah. When they failed to investigate complaints of his misconduct, ignored ample opportunities to learn of his misconduct, in addition to known existing and prior misconduct, retained him in positions of authority, and intentionally covered up his misconduct. Holbrook's subsequent misconduct was open and obvious, and defendants knew it. They simply covered up his abuse, retained him, and repeatedly appointed him to multiple positions of leadership across the fellowship. Holbrook was finally fired in 2018, but even that had nothing to do with his sexual misconduct. He was fired for being disobedient to Gary Hargrave.
Right. So that, again, is what the plaintiff's saying based off of their deposition and their reading of all of the stuff. I think what's really interesting there, it says Holbrook's subsequent misconduct was open and obvious and defendants knew it. And most of the time when they make these statements like that, there's a citation and it like points to one piece of evidence. Again, Holbrook's subsequent misconduct was open and obvious and defendants knew it. And then they go on to list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, possibly more exhibits on that. Evidence, and it is like, and it's everything. Like we can just think of a number of things like Shalom's letters or some of the stuff that I was reading through some of the depositions are things like when they find out that he's been cheating on his wife which we covered in the Gary Hargrave deposition, and they didn't look into his misconduct deeper with somebody who was borderline legal age. These types of things are some of the things that they list off in there. Plus, they're citing back to those cases with the witness and testimony of like the 8-year-old girl, the 13, that the minors. And so all of this stuff. And then when it happens more recently with this plaintiff, it's again ignored, silenced, move on.
Yep. So in summation, the plaintiff's attorneys argue that Gary Hargrave did have a special relationship with both the teacher at the school because of the system of shepherding, plus the direct oversight that he had of the Apostolic Company that we saw in his deposition, even though he tried to deny it up and down, how he had total control of everyone and everything. Moreover, Marilyn specifically selected said teacher to be plucked from his home at 12 years old and moved an hour away to be a part of the Valley Church to volunteer, and she personally directed a member of the Apostolic Company and school leader / principal one to enforce this. The principal of the school and member of APCO later hired that individual to teach, so that would be principal number 2. Later hired that individual to teach at the church school. This exemplifies the aforementioned special relationship. At any point, Gary Hargrave could and should have known about that teacher's history, and he had total authority and responsibility to keep something like this from happening.
So this is so, like, again, it's that special relationship thing, which they're talking about in here, the
rule of
relationship.
law. The rule of law is that a special relationship has to exist with either the perpetrator or the victim for it to be, problematic.
Right.
For lack
and
of a better
remember,
word.
this is all of these lawsuits are directed at the organization. So like Hargrave Family Ministries, Apostolic Company, etc., not at the perpetrators like Rick. And I mean, obviously they're detailing all of this stuff, but it's at them. So they're having to prove that special relationship. And what's so beautiful is that like Gary did all that work by being the absolute authority, creating, the designated relationships, the divine order and the upward flow and all of that stuff. It's so clear. And what it shows in there too, what they talk about in this, that's so interesting, that really ties it together. In Gary's deposition, they connect these dots too, showing that Marilyn was the, Apostolic Fathering Ministry after John died.
Gary and Marilyn,
Gary and Marilyn sat in that seat on the APCO flowchart thing. On the Apostolic Company.
At the top.
It's both of them. And what they say in here is that Marilyn specifically selected this person and moved them over an hour away from one of the satellite churches to be in the central place, and specifically chose that person and plugged them in and said, you need to be a part of this. And what it shows to me is the layers of control in all of this. Like, why are you selecting somebody to take them away from their parents, plug them into the system? All of these events happen, sexual abuse and becoming a teacher, being totally inappropriate with the students and all of this stuff happening. It's like, because like, how many of us did Marilyn go and pluck from one of these satellites and say, you go sit here? Why was he singled out? I mean, this is showing the special relationship and the ratification of this person as putting them into this position to be in this place for these things to happen. And does one, precede the other? Did she see, I don't know, but
who knows? But that's what is interesting. And that's what I should have articulated better. It's not just problematic. What they're saying is because a special relationship exists, that these leaders had a responsibility and the power, to
do something
either
about
ratify this behavior or prevent. They are responsible.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we all understand and know, and what they show with so many different examples, like what they're saying earlier about when somebody says something, inappropriate behavior, sexual abuse, and it's like, oh, it happens to everybody, shut the hell up kind of thing. And understanding like Shalom's letters being sent in to Gary and Marilyn and like nothing is done. Just over and over again, it's these leaders have the power, they have the knowledge, they know and are capable of stopping. They know about sexual abuse, they know about the pain, they know about rape, they know about all of these things that are happening. They have the power to do something about it. They've shown time and time again that they can kick people out of the church. They have phones. They know the numbers 9 + 1 + 1. They know what to do. They've been trained by the social workers who are supposed to come in at the school. They're mandated reporters. They know these things. They can do something about it, and yet they don't.
They don't. Yeah. Yep. And then the plaintiff's attorney is going to talk about Holbrook's special relationship with Gary Hargrave, the Apostolic Fathering Ministry, and say that is indisputable. Holbrook was commissioned to the Apostolic Company by the founder, John Robert Stevens, in 1977, and remained in that position up until his departure in 2018. He was the son of Marilyn Hargrave, the cult leader's wife, who was the cult leader's wife, and she was, essentially the cult leader as well, and as such provided greater authority and control over TLWF entities, while simultaneously being insulated from any consequence for his actions anywhere in the fellowship by the defendants.
Mm-hmm. TLWF was rife with sexual abuse, both inside and outside the homes of its congregants. The record is replete with accounts of sexual abuse, and even with facts similar to plaintiffs. For example, other minors were abused by caregivers and leaders. Many were abused and harassed by Holbrook. In addition, plaintiffs specifically exhibited red flag behaviors at school that would cause any rational human, quote, or parentheses, let alone a properly trained teacher, to suspect she was being abused. Given the overt sexual nature of the church, prior incidents, and the obvious behaviors of plaintiff exhibited at school, that she would be subject to abuse was clearly foreseeable. Moreover, teachers' pre-employment sexual abuse was reported by plaintiff's mother to the Living Word Fellowship leaders in 1995 and was later reported by a student to the church leaders and principal of the school. This is church leader / principal 2. As to Holbrook, there is a long and checkered history of his sexual improprieties, not least of which was the report to Hargrave in 1984 that he was sexually abusing a minor. Any suggestion that sexual abuse here was not foreseeable would be futile.
Love it.
So
beautifully written.
There's a little bit of overlap in that statement from like some of the other stuff that we read, because some of these things, because again, there's multiple entities here, so they filed different documents for the different entities. That one was directly targeted at Hargrave Family Ministries, showing that like they were responsible because of just how fucking obvious all of this stuff was. It should have been.
Yeah, and this last paragraph really sums it up beautifully. In this case, there's powerful evidence of cover-up, malice, oppression, and fraud. For example, Hargrave was aware of Holbrook's molestation of minors in 1984. Dozens of women were punished or threatened for reporting abuse. As one pastor testified regarding TLWF and its treatment of sexual misconduct under Hargrave, quote, "It was never about the people." Mm-hmm. Hargrave presided over a fellowship for 4 decades, elevated himself over the individuals, required submission to a supposedly divine order that placed himself and his wife at the top, and kept Holbrook and others in place despite known prior sexual molestation, while simultaneously holding him out to be a respected religious leader. As Hargrave succinctly put it, "If you have a problem with your shepherd, I have a problem with you." That is a quote from Gary Hargrave. Mm-hmm. Clearly, there are ample triable issues of fact on the issue of punitive damages. So good. This document was just so beautifully written.
So beautifully written. Again, that was written by the plaintiff's attorneys, Gallagher and the Zalkin group. And what's really amazing about it, again, this isn't the opening statement by them. This is the closing statement. This is, they make
the last document that's filed.
This is the last document. Yes, exactly. They file their initial what is it? Complaint. The complaint. Then the church and all those people get together and they file their opposition to it. All this research is done and evidence gathered and all of that stuff. They compile everything. They file these other documents that are disputed facts, where they kind of go back and forth and they list out like this, and then they dispute, and the two sides like respond to each other. There's a whole mess of those documents that are really confusing to read, but they're out there. They are arguing back and forth, and then when the church files their thing that we mentioned at the top, I'm just summarizing this again.
The motion for summary judgment.
The motion for summary judgment, saying like, see, after all this work that we've done, it's bullshit. These charges are bullshit. Allegations are unfounded, whatever. Then the plaintiff's lawyers come in with this and drop this shit, and then that's it. Mm-hmm. Nobody's filing things. The church is silent after that. Yeah. After this is filed. The only other thing that we have, which we're getting into now, is the judge's tentative ruling.
Which, to then reiterate, is with regard to plaintiff number 2's case. But it addresses all the same issues, right?
You know what? Before we get into the ruling, there was actually one little clip we wanted to play. And because the last thing we actually talked about, is that okay? That I interrupt before we get into
Sure,
the
I forgot, yeah.
I want to underline this. I think I want to play this clip for a number of reasons. I'm going to give it a lot of context because it's actually really interesting what was happening here and kind of shows, I think, so much of this culture of continuing to silence and protect abusers instead of exposing wounds so that it can heal and really digging out all the shit. It's just the like, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down thing. This was January 2019, so the church was pretty much in its collapse here. I think a lot of people had left, although from my memory, I'm seeing a lot of people that were still there. Gary had stepped down. Gary Hargrave had stepped down. Rick was technically out. Various leaders in the church were stepping down and around, which was causing issues in the church itself and who was in charge and what was happening. And so they brought in, there was a lot of talk to like bring in a mediator, somebody who was objective and outside and could, help navigate the blop-de-blop-de-blop. So they hired this guy who worked for the church's university to come in and help usher through that thing. And they called a meeting for teachers and parents at the school. And because that was also one of the things that needed to be dealt with, like what's going to happen with the school, et cetera. And moreover, Principal 3, so not the two principals we've been talking about, an interim principal was brought in. I'm not 100% sure if she was interim, but she was the principal at this moment. She had quit in the wake of this. I'm not 100% sure why, but she had quit. And so that left this like vacuum of leadership across the board. What was going to happen? It was like the middle of the school year, So they called this meeting to deal with all these goings on. The guy that was brought in to deal with this stuff rambled for 40 minutes, not on topic. From my memory and playing back the audio a little bit, it's mostly his flight schedule over the past week. I kid you not.
Wow.
Tomorrow with the board before I get on a plane and hopefully eventually land, although I understand there's a blizzard forecasted for tomorrow, Northern Illinois. And so I got on, I was actually over at another place and got to the nearest airport, which happened to be Moline, for those of you who know where the Quad Cities are.
And eventually a mother of one of the students of the school who was not a part of the church. And again, these are parents who are not privy to what was happening in the church, that they don't know who Rick Holbrook is. They didn't know who Gary was. They knew the church existed and was connected in some way, but they didn't know anything about it. They just had their kids at this nice little neighborhood Christian school. And she kind of gets fed up.
They didn't even know how involved Rick Holbrook was with the school.
They didn't know he existed. They didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So, and they certainly didn't mention him in this. Again, it's his flight schedule. It's this guy's flight schedule for 40 minutes. She raises her hand and she goes, "Excuse me, what are we doing here?" And
I feel like I missed something. I feel like you just spoke for almost 40 minutes and I still don't understand the problem statement, to be quite honest. I'm trying to understand what we are here to solve. What are people doing who don't do it?
And they kind of alluded to the fact that like the principal had quit for quote personal reasons. And she goes, what's going on here? Could this not have been an email? Like, why are we here? If she quit and you're getting a new principal, like, just let us know when you find a new one. And so then after that, various church members who it seems are still trying to be a part of the church at this point, get up to try and clarify the situation. They did not.
So the church here has had, kind of like a falling out of the leadership, more or less. And so it's too long to get into any other details.
They did not at any point say there was a sexual abuse scandal at the church where one of the leaders was finally kicked out, and there was all of this sexual abuse, and the head of the church, who was his stepfather, resigned, and so did a number of other leaders, and now there's this power vacuum, there's this problem. There's a little bit of conversation of restructuring of the board at the church and how that affects the school. And so there's a little bit of like that stuff going on. People are still confused, a lot of questions being asked, and then finally, one of the teachers stands up to say, hey, your kids, like, we got a good year planned. I'm excited for this year. Things are going really good here. They're figuring out some technical stuff that no one really understands. Who gives a shit? But like, I just want you to know that I got your kids back. I'm here for it. Round of applause. Only person the whole evening to get a round of applause when he gets up and when he leaves. We will play an excerpt from this. There's a key part of it that is disturbing to me and upsetting, whatever. This is the teacher in the lawsuit. This is the teacher that we've been talking about. This is the teacher that has been inappropriate with the children. This is the teacher who was accused of sexually abusing a child when he was their babysitter. This is that teacher who still, after all of those years and two principals knowing about all of this, the reports over and over and over again about his misconduct, misbehavior, all of that stuff, still a teacher in 2018, 2019, early 2019. So let's play that audio clip.
From a teacher.
Hi, I'm a teacher. I teach junior high and high school and after school here. And I would say, to your question specifically, I think being here is a huge support. Right? Because I know this was short notice, but not all the parents were able to attend. But from my standpoint, as a person who went to Tentative Learning my entire life and have taught there for 23 years, it was founded in 1974, so it's 1 year older than me, so we won't go into that number right now. Older than I'd like to be. But it is still a inclusive learning environment. Like, your children are safe. We're all doing our very best to continue with our awesome lesson plans and field trips and all of those things. And we're just looking for this to be able to springboard to see what it could be even better, right? So I don't want anyone to leave here with a sense of like some big doom or problem. Like, there's a lot of legal stuff. I'm a teacher. I don't want to deal with legal stuff. But who knows what the future board might hold. Obviously, we want to have parent involvement. We want to have teacher involvement. But I just think your smiling faces are support. Your children being there, it's a joy to teach your children.
One question, can I take you on the road with me? That was awesome.
You've heard that like pretty much for the first time. I've been sitting on that for 5 years, watching it get worse and worse and worse every single year. What was your takeaway from it, listening to it for the first time today, Charity?
I was just like, oh my God, this guy who has 20 plus years worth of reprimands for sexually inappropriate conduct in his capacity as a teacher is the one that's standing up and assuring the parents that their kids are safe. Are you fucking kidding me? And he gets a round of applause. They have no idea that he has this record. I mean, some of the, I wonder though, because some of those reprimands were parents calling the principal and saying that, you know, my kid is saying that this teacher is saying XYZ.
Those parents would have been, most of them would have been gone though by then.
Probably
not parents anymore of students in the school. Maybe.
Yeah. But then also, you know, knowing that the principal knew of these allegations of sexual abuse of a minor by this guy. And he's the one up there saying your kids are safe. Come on. Yeah. This teacher, though, I will say, was fired at the end of the school year after the lawsuits were filed. So he was removed. The school pretty much lost all of their students and enrollment over the next year or two. They've now changed their name. They're down to pretty much nothing, just elementary school. Not excited about that personally, but it's what is it called now? North Valley Christian?
North Valley Christian, still associated and run by church members. Still completely intertwined with the board at the church and run by church members.
Wow.
not the principles that we've named here are nothing to do with it anymore. Not named, but that we pointed out, nothing to do with it anymore. To me, and again, we're going into the last little bits here, which are the judgments of I just want to wrap up this teacher thing. Mm-hmm. Personally, it's been a hard one to swallow, because it's required all of this for me to fully believe. I felt pretty early that he didn't need to be a teacher there, because he's not qualified, and because of my experience with him, especially as an adult now looking back at it. Right. But to see the extent of it in these documents and what's here has really pushed most of the uncertainty, all of it out of my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That insecurity you feel when you're like, oh, I know I experienced this. I know it was bad. I know this and this and this.
You almost gaslight yourself.
Yourself. Yeah. Or you make excuses of it or whatever. But to see all this stuff, it just kind of anyways, sure, it's a hard one to realize. And then of course my own personal memories of other things and stuff that that draw it all in. Time to get to the judge's final rulings here.
Okay, so this is the judge's ruling on the motion for summary judgment that was filed by the defendants. And this is regarding plaintiff 2, so this is a different case. This is a different plaintiff. This is an action for negligence, negligent hiring, negligent failure to warn, sexual battery, and sexual harassment.
Those are the
causes
charges,
of action. Yeah.
Causes of action, but think of them like the charges that the church is having to defend.
Correct.
Cool.
So, and we did already talk about what the motion for summary judgment is, right? Earlier.
Let's go ahead and talk about it again. Let's remind everybody, because I think that's one of the things that, we talked about it kind of at the top, but the motion of summary judgment. What is a motion of summary judgment? It's very important to get this, because it helps understand what is happening and what this judge's ruling is talking about and what it's addressing, because it's addressing that motion for summary judgment that is created and written and submitted by the church.
Right.
So what is that, Charity?
A motion for summary judgment is just a pretrial request that the church filed to ask the court to end the case without a trial.
Right.
Essentially. And so this is the judge's response to that request, essentially. So this is regarding plaintiff 2, as we said. Do you want to read the details of that, or would you like me to?
I like it when you read the details. But I'll just kind of set it up a little bit. This is the first couple paragraphs are kind of the factual background and kind of share some details about what this case is about. And again, like we've been doing in this episode, we are leaving out the details of the sexual abuse, but it is very clearly sexual abuse. Like we have written here, plaintiff's father, which is referred to as Doe 5. We might use that interchangeably. Father, Doe 5, sexually abused the plaintiff when he was 3 to 5 years old. And so that's what this is talking about. And we're leaving out all the details of that because there's a lot. But generally, that's what this is a ruling on.
Okay, so the pastors at 2 of the Living Word churches knew about the sexual abuse that the plaintiff was suffering. The father had repeatedly informed pastors at Church of the Living Word that he had thoughts and impulses concerning sexually abusing the plaintiff, who was his son, as I said. The mother caught the father sexually abusing the plaintiff and subsequently reported the abuse to the church and church school authorities. And this is where the culture of the Living Word is highlighted in such an egregious way. Mm-hmm. In the ruling, the judge's ruling, there's a quote, plaintiff's mother testified that she did not report the incident to the police or other authority first because as a member of the church, she reported it to the church, which was, quote, the way to do things. So this is just a great example of how dangerous that culture can be, where she's brainwashed to think that is the proper procedure, right? You submit everything to your shepherds first, even when it's a criminal activity. Well,
I think it underscores and highlights what's so sad about this, and what's so dangerous about it too, is that a mother who I think is experiencing probably one of the worst things that you could see happen in your family, and among the worst things that could happen in your family. And like, your first instinct is to go to your church leaders because that's what you're trained to do, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing, to go to somebody you trust or you're supposed to trust. But not to immediately go to the police or not to go to authorities or any of that stuff, but to go to somebody you're supposed to trust, which I don't think there's anything objectively wrong with going to your pastors immediately when something like this happens. But then it's what happens after that. It's the fact that she goes here for help, and then this is the way that they treat her. And we'll read that now.
And I just want to say that this is like one of those common threads that we see throughout all of these lawsuits, is like the silencing. And this isn't one of the lawsuits, but in our interview with Lauren Beckman, she was, praised for not reporting her rape to the police. And it's just,
that's exactly the thing. It's like, keep everything in house so that it can't go anywhere else. And that's exactly what you see happen in this case. So go ahead and continue reading.
So the father confessed that he had been sexually abusing the plaintiff to pastors at Church of the Living Word, who reported him to the Apostolic Company. The pastors told the plaintiff and his mother to stay quiet and not to inform the police. The plaintiff's mother decided to inform a church and school leader because she knew that this individual was a mandatory reporter in her capacity as, a teacher and school leader. So this leader did call the police. The perpetrator was arrested. But then the mother and plaintiff were told by the church leaders to not press charges and that they would deal with his impure tendencies, quote, in-house.
Yeah. So essentially what that is that like, she seeks out somebody that she knows is a mandatory reporter. And that person, from reading it in the deposition, there's a few different like viewpoints, but essentially they're having meeting after meeting after meeting at the Church of the Living Word with this father. The mother's brought in. The plaintiff is there for some of it and sees it from the outside. But eventually, once the school leaders, who are technically mandatory reporters, are brought into it, there's a meeting and they decide, well, they have to inform the police. And so that process happens, that initial intake and the arrest, or the police get involved and all of that. But then when they come to the plaintiff and the plaintiff's mother and say, let's press charges, or do you want to press charges? That's where the pastors step in and say, don't do it, because he's going to be in jail for a long time. He'll go away and we don't want that. So we're going to handle it in house. And so they don't press charges.
This is where I feel like it gets even worse, is the pastors also indicated that plaintiff should keep the information secret. They were working with his father on his father's impure thoughts. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, but prayer and pastoral counseling is not going to help a situation like this.
It's like so many of these other things, the way I look at it with like so much of this stuff, it's the same thing I see like with my mom's stuff, with her being told by the leaders, like these same fucking leaders, to stay away from chemotherapy and to use this quacky shit because the dentist said so. They thought they knew better. And I can see them sitting there being like, he's having these impure thoughts. He's doing this weird stuff with his kid. It's because of the Nephilim spirit. We know how to handle this. He's fine to go be with kids. In fact, maybe we should let him do it to see if the Nephilim is still in him.
Wow. Yeah.
Or something. It's just like they thought they knew better than fucking experts in this field. It's so don't arrogant. Involve the world, because we got the word from John Robert Stevens. We should be able to figure this out. Thank you very much. That's the innocent version. This is the innocent excuse, not the nefarious one, which is like, oh, cool, we love ourselves some predators. Right.
It's ignorance, or is it ignorance?
Right.
Or is it we're fostering this on purpose? We're fostering a culture of abusers on purpose.
It goes on to show that the defendants failed to investigate the father's confession and instead promoted him and allowed him to maintain positions of leadership at the Church of the Living Word and other affiliated church. The father was also made the head of the youth program.
which is bonkers. Can you imagine, like, you hear that a man has sexually abused his own child and they're like, you know what's a great idea? Let's put him in charge of the youth. Hello?
Yeah. What does this next thing say here?
The plaintiff's mother believed that the father was still chaperoning children at church and school events. And so she informed the school principal, who was church leader principal 2, that this was not acceptable given what he had done to the plaintiff. The plaintiff's mother told anybody that would listen at church that Doe 5, the father, should be kept away from children. She was then told that she had to be silent about plaintiff's abuse and that if she could do so, she was welcome to stay in the church.
That's wild. That is so crazy that like this, it's so classic to like the mom comes in, is like, hey, I understand you don't want us going to the cops, but like, why is he still, you don't want us pressing charges, but like, why is he still involved? Why is he around kids? Why is he doing all of this stuff? And they're just like, shut up and go away.
Like,
and if you don't shut up, we're kicking you out of the church.
Yeah. They don't kick out the perpetrator. Yeah. They're threatening to kick her out if she won't shut up about it.
Yeah. And it's like what you said a number of times, like how many people did they kick out that did like nothing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet they keep this abuser in the church and give him chance after chance. Yeah. In good standing.
That's where like, I just think it really makes me suspicious after having read all of this stuff with the lawsuits. It just seems like they were keeping, sexual predators around for a reason. Like they didn't do anything to get rid of these people. So it makes you wonder, were they trying to foster a culture, for
abusers,
child sexual predators to have opportunities?
Yeah,
it raises a lot of questions.
A lot of questions for me too. It's the same thing with the last plaintiff and the last story we just went through of like, are you guys dumb or are you doing this on purpose?
Yeah.
Why is it that abusers get chance after chance after chance, get excuses, victims get ignored and silenced and pushed out of the church, but the abusers get chance after chance after chance, and all these other people are kicked out of the church for like stupid reasons? But you can't kick out Rick Holbrook. You can't kick out this guy. In fact, he's hanging out with more children. You take the other guy who has accusations of sexual abuse and you make him a teacher.
Yeah.
Are you that dumb? Are these people that dumb? Or are they intentionally creating an environment where we can bring more kids into grooming and sexual abuse so we can pluck the ones that we want out for the top leadership? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, if you look at like the school, you see all this stuff happening around this school, and Rick's last two wives, he pulled from the school. He walked up at their graduation and he gave the commencement speech. And then he said, I'm going to marry you. And then he did it again with the next one. I'm going to marry you. Not out loud, but essentially this is what happened. And like, John Robert Stevens created this school to like, create an army of children that would grow up to like be warriors in the word or whatever crap, the sword and the Bible and all that stuff going on. But at the same time, they're also being groomed. The predators are allowed in. Yeah. Right? Like, what is happening here?
And I don't know if we already said it, but it's like, I think you brought it up. You could get kicked out for just not being submissive. You get kicked out. I mean, I have friends who were like told, don't come around. You're like, they would tell other members like, that person's a wolf trying to pluck off like sheep. And this is like a really nice person, a genuinely good person, but just that wasn't bought into all of the submission crap. And like, those people were kicked out. Marilyn kicked out people who questioned her authority, people in leadership, but you don't kick out people who are like actively hurting children.
Yeah, right. That's crazy. That's like, the bar is so low That's such an easy one. It's so easy to kick people. It's like it said at the end of the P&A where it was, what was the line? It was Rick was eventually kicked out in 2018, but even that was just for disobeying Hargrave.
Yeah, it wasn't for all of his previous.
It wasn't for all of the misconduct that they knew about before. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Okay. So plaintiff 2, the story's still going. Let's read here.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So in addition, God, this is just so heartbreaking. In addition to having been abused by his father, the plaintiff had been exhibiting red flag behavior. So what they're referring to is the overly sexualized behavior, which is a red flag behavior from a child. If they're exhibiting over sexualized behavior, chances are, and this is from there was some testimony from an expert in the depositions that is 9 times out of 10 is because they're being sexually abused. So this red flag behavior by plaintiff 2 at the school and the church should have been obvious to the leaders. Plaintiff 2 had also been being sexually abused by church members, a church employee, and was sexually harassed by a leader. So this poor kid, is being abused on all sides, and none of these leaders seem to give a shit. And it goes on to say in this document that this isn't the only situation where something like this has gone down, where leaders are being told about sexual abuse and they're just oh no, ignore it. So there was a former student who testified to a number of incidents of sexual abuse of minors at the school. In 1996, while a student at the school, she witnessed a fellow student being sexually assaulted. She reported the incident to school principal, who was the church leader / principal 2, who told her that she did not see the assault and to mind her own business. This former student subsequently had a minor child at the school. When she believed that the child had been molested by another child at school, she reported the incident to the school administrator, who was church leader principal 1, who stated that it was wrong to raise any concerns and that what happened was not a big deal.
So she saw it at the school.
Wild.
When she was a student. Then when she had her kid there, she saw it happen or thought it was happening to her child. And both of these principals that were principals at different times and are members of the church leadership dismissed it.
Yeah.
What the hell were you two doing? Principal 2 was my
Covering up
principal.
abusers.
She was my English teacher. The fuck, dude? You weren't teaching me how to spell. And you weren't protecting kids. What were you doing there? I don't fucking get it.
And that's just so typical of the church leaders. Anytime any of us would raise concerns about something, be you'd just be told oh, mind your own business. I was literally told mind your own business when I told, actually it was church leader / principal 2, I think something's going on with Rick and Lorena, and she told me to mind my own business. It's okay, well, fuck me then. Guess I'm not observing what I'm observing.
Yeah. Well, it seems like she had that, that response on lock. I mean, it makes you, part of the reason you become a leader is because in this environment is because you won't say anything when you see something bad happening. And that enables all the people to just move right on through and just do whatever they want.
And Marilyn set it up that way. She like I said earlier, she kicked out anyone who questioned her.
That's right. So,
but that's why, so this is also fucking horrible. And that's why this judge's ruling is so satisfying. Because, and we were told that more often than not, these rulings on a motion for summary judgment are 1 page long. And this one is several pages long and just kind of in legalese just tears into the church.
Yeah. And we're going to do our best to kind of break down what that means. But again, let's remember as we get into this. So that's kind of shows the background of what this particular case is. And this ruling is specific to plaintiff 2.
Yeah.
Although a lot of this stuff, fits in with the other cases. But this ruling is specific to that technically. And it seems so remember, this ruling is in response to the church's request for summary judgment. And so this document, this ruling seems to indicate that the judge would likely find the church negligent on all of these counts if the lawsuit were to continue on all of these counts that we will list off here in a second. You will see that the church asks for a summary judgment and the judge denies the request for most of these counts. So let's get into that detail now. So we're going to list off what the counts are, which we kind of said at the top, the negligence, that thing. And then we will say what the judge is either denying the church's request for summary judgment or they are granting the church's request for summary judgment. And we told you what the summary judgment was, right?
Yeah, we
need
did.
to do it again. It's all just there's so much.
We spent so long like dissecting this trying to make sure we understood it right. And
that's exactly right. Okay,
basically,
so let's look
we're
at the
lawyers
first.
now. I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
not at all.
Probably the most incompetent lawyers that ever existed. No. Charity
we're the
could
lawyers that
probably
would have
make
a billboard on the side of the road.
That's
no,
right. Okay,
we did our best.
Yeah, so first count, negligence.
First cause of action or count, same thing, of negligence, denied. So the church wants this charge thrown out. The judge denies their request across the board and says school had notice that the plaintiff was likely the victim of sexual abuse, referring back to how the principals found out. And there was also a red flag behavior being exhibited by plaintiff too. And so then the judge cannot find that as a matter of law that no duty was owed and denies the motion for summary adjudication. A church employee also abused plaintiff 2 on church grounds, and so the judge says this about that. If the abuse did take place on church grounds, then the church did have an affirmative duty to protect plaintiff from sexual abuse. Thus, Doe 3, who is the local church, fails to meet its burden. Summary adjudication is denied on this ground, basically saying the church was negligent.
Okay, so for charge 2, negligent hiring, retention, and supervision, let's look at this.
So the church wants this charge thrown out as well. The judge grants their request when it comes to the father, but denies their request when it comes to the church employee. So granted in part, denied in part. These are the details. The father never engaged in abuse during his employment, and father's employment with defendant, local church, did not result in damage to the plaintiff. With respect to the father, the motion for summary adjudication is granted. There is no evidence that his occasional HVAC work for the church had anything to do with the harm suffered by the plaintiff here. And that seems obvious because, he was the plaintiff's father, so he had opportunity to abuse the plaintiff in his home. It wasn't just because the plaintiff was exposed to him at the church.
Yeah.
However, the defendant's evidence is insufficient to establish that the defendant did not have knowledge of the church employee's propensity to commit sexual abuse. So remember, this boy had been also sexually abused by an employee of the church who was also a church member. So on this cause, the motion for summary adjudication is denied. So motion for summary judgment is granted with respect to Doe 5, the father, and is denied with respect to the church employee.
Yeah, essentially saying that the church is responsible because the church employee abused the plaintiff, but is essentially not responsible for the father because, like you said, that happened at home and it wasn't, the relationship wasn't through the church. The relationship was...
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So on number 3, negligent failure to warn, train, or educate.
So the judge denies the church's request across the board to have this charge thrown out. Quote, the evidence does not show that defendant was unaware of any risk that the plaintiff's father posed that would give rise to a duty to warn of sexual abuse and how to handle such situations. The defendant thus fails to meet its burden of showing that no triable issue of material fact remains over whether the defendant had a duty to warn of the plaintiff's father's sexual abuse. Summary adjudication is denied on this ground. So basically the judge is saying that the church didn't provide enough evidence that it did not know about plaintiff's sexual abuse, and it did have a duty to warn about sexual abuse and how to handle these situations.
Essentially saying that they should have known. Like they essentially knew, they should have known. There's a bunch of... Yeah. Right.
They didn't provide enough proof that they didn't know or that they took precautions. Like they should have seen it and they should have known how to handle it properly.
Then the next one, negligence per se, which we had to look this up. And negligence per se is a legal doctrine applied when a defendant violated a regulation meant to prevent harm. So like if there's a regulation that's like, you need to follow this regulation so that harm doesn't happen. And the defendant, in this case, the church, just did not, they violated that regulation. They didn't do it. And so let's see what the judge's ruling was on negligence per se.
So the judge denies the church's request across the board and says, a triable issue of material fact remains over whether defendant, local church, and its employees complied with the mandatory reporting requirements. So the judge is saying there is a triable issue here. The defendant, it's not clear that the defendant and its employees complied with the mandatory reporting requirements.
Right. Which is interesting because like you see that, I think what it shows very clearly here is like, okay, so they reluctantly, after the mother finally went and hunted down somebody who she knew was required to report, they reluctantly reported it to the authorities, but that's not enough. Because after the fact, they told the mother not to. I don't know if this is exactly what her reasoning is, but you see that story of like after the fact, the church then says, don't continue. So this is negligence per se. This is they didn't comply with those mandatory reporting requirements. Even though they technically mandatory reported, they checked the box, but then they were like, don't press charges still.
Well, I wonder too if this isn't with regard to the church employee, because they didn't, what I gathered is like the judge is saying, you didn't, defendant, provide enough evidence that you didn't know that this church employee was molesting kids. And the church school leaders as mandatory reporters,
Yeah, it's. I think it's across the board. I don't think it has anything to do with either the employee or the father, because it just says there is an issue of teachers at school failing to investigate plaintiff's sexualized behavior, is one of the quotes from that. So it's just the fact that a teacher is supposed to know and is supposed to investigate and supposed to look at this stuff that's part of the mandatory reporting requirements, and they see the sexualized behavior. It doesn't matter who's doing it at that point. It's your responsibility as teachers, and they didn't.
So again, the judge denied the church's request to have the charge of negligence per se thrown out.
So then the next one is sexual battery. This is number 5. And again, the church wants this thrown out, but the judge grants the request in this case. Why is that, Charity?
The defendant argues that the cause of action for sexual battery fails because the defendant cannot be held vicariously liable for the plaintiff's father's sexual abuse because it did not take place in an employment context. There is no dispute about that fact. Summary adjudication is granted as to this cause of action. So that does make sense because this happened, in the plaintiff's home.
Happened in the family, yeah.
Within the family, yeah.
Yeah. And then sexual harassment is charge 6. Let's look at this one. This has a lot of moving pieces to it because they're actually talking about the father, an employee, and one of the church leaders and their various levels of harassment, quote, harassment in here.
On this cause of action, the judge grants the church's request when it comes to the father and church leader, but denies the church's request when it comes to the church employee. The defendant argues that the cause of action for sexual harassment fails because they cannot be held vicariously liable for plaintiff's father's sexual abuse as well as the abuse of others. With respect to the actions of the church employee and church leader, the analysis is different. One was an employee of the church and school when he committed the alleged sexual assault on plaintiff. The other was a church leader who, according to the evidence produced by plaintiff heard say about him to other church members, insert lewd comment here. And this is a comment that we did read in the document, but it's just so awful and insensitive and horrible that we just didn't.
We wanted to try and include it because we wanted people to know how bad it was. Essentially, that it was a church leader making fun of sexual abuse. That the church leader essentially knew that plaintiff, who was a minor at the time, had gone through the sexual abuse, and they made an incredibly lewd comment about that to other members of the church, and plaintiff
front of the
overheard
plaintiff.
this. Yeah, overheard that happen. And so this was one of the counts that they wanted to be sexual harassment, but there's a technicality as to why it can't be counted as sexual harassment according to the judge. And the judge said, the comment, however, doesn't show, quote, an abnormal sexual interest in plaintiff by the church leader. So,
Yeah. So, I mean, he's just an asshole. He's
he's just an asshole, but apparently it doesn't count. And so then lastly, the court, so they grant the motion for summary judgment with respect to the father and the church leader, but they deny it when it comes to the employee, again, because the employee was able to harass the plaintiff because they were employee of the church. Okay, so that's all the counts. Those are the 6 for this. Again, essentially, they have been denied on 5 of those 6, with 2 of them being in part denial and granting. But it's really interesting. I mean, for us, like digging into this and trying to understand what all this means and all of that. But the fact that, again, like we heard, and from what we understand, these kind of judgments in this type of case don't get laid out like this, but it's just so much shitty behavior by the church, and so much, what you're seeing here. I mean, like, according to this judge, so much negligence by the church and school that you could almost copy paste a lot of this negligence across the board with so many things that we've heard about just on this podcast, not to mention the stuff that's in these depositions or in some of the other cases. And it's just so much reinforcing, and like a judge reinforcing the fact that this church just repeatedly put the needs and the safety of not only the members of the church, just regular congregants, but straight up the children of the school that they had, dead last over the leadership and basically just other abusers in the church. Absolutely terrible.
some of the bullet points here that the judge talks about is like, and I feel like this helps summarize it a little better, is the church was negligent in protecting the plaintiff from sexual abuse. Why? 1, Doe 5, the father repeatedly informed pastors at the church that he had impulses. 2, the mother caught the father and informed the church. 3, the father confessed to church leaders who reported him to the apostolic company. 4, church leaders told the plaintiff and his mother to stay quiet and not inform the police. 5, and we have this bolded, highlighted, large, the church exercised significant control over congregants that suggested a relationship that is more than a simple membership in a church. Yeah, because, hi, you're in a cult. 6, plaintiff exhibited clear red flag behavior indicating that he was being sexually abused, and this should have been obvious to church and school leaders. Under these circumstances, the court cannot find that as a matter of law, no duty was owed, and denies the motion for summary adjudication.
Right.
I love that.
Right. But the thing that is very clear to me is these documents get filed in these cases, that points and authorities that details all of this shit gets filed, and the ruling gets filed, and then boom, 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 these 4 cases, notice of settlement. Mm-hmm. So it's not hard to make this leap of logic of like, you see this stuff laid out, you're the church's lawyers, and you're Gary's lawyer, and you go, do you have anything to counter this more?
Right.
Is there anything else that you could possibly, any other evidence? No. Okay, let's call it, that's
Right.
That's what it seems like is happening.
That's what
here.
it seems like, that they're like, yeah, okay, so if this goes to trial, we're fucked, so we should just settle.
Right. And
I'm speaking as like the defendants.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And if we are way off base here and you're a lawyer that understands this stuff, please.
Yeah, please let us know.
Please let us know.
Again, did not go to law school.
Yeah. Yeah. Barely graduated a cult school, for me at least. Charity at least speaks a few different languages, went to like actual schools, pretty educated. Pretty smart for a former cult member who grew up in the cornfield sticks of Iowa,
Oh, wow.
in the shadow of a cult compound.
The shadow of a cult compound. Oh, I feel like I should write a poem.
It's
titled
called The Shadow of
In the Shadow of a Cult Compound.
I love that. Mm-hmm.
an ode to Shiloh.
Ew.
Right? Not an ode.
No. Well, okay. What are your opinions on this? How does it make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel
Let's
like
decompress.
awful. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad this is over for the plaintiffs because I know this was a grueling process for them. I hope that they're happy with how this turned out. In Charity's dreamland, Gary had to pay like out the ass. I don't know, but it's too bad that no one was held criminally liable because that can happen when you file a civil case if they find like, and who knows if that's a statute of limitations issue or what, I don't know. But, you know, it would have been nice to see some of these people in orange jumpsuits, but the best we could hope for is that they had to pay a lot of money, Gary and his, entities.
Yeah. I like that it's putting into the record these people and like dragging them more. You know, it's one thing to have a pool of people that have had experiences and share those experiences. It's one thing to have a podcast that like, you know, what do we call it? Is like all bitter about it, you know, and talks and talks. It's another thing to see it in these documents and to see how it falls and to see a judge's writing about this and showing it's just like, you guys fucking suck, you know, which is what she should have written. Like
Gary Hargrave,
you suck,
you fucking
man.
suck. Signed, Judge.
Thanks for listening to Oops, I'm in a Cult.
Please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Follow us on Instagram at Oops, I'm in a Cult Podcast.
Support us on Supercast by visiting our website at oopsiminacult.com to subscribe and receive exclusive bonus content.
Or email us at oopsiminacult@gmail.com.
Take it easy and don't join a cult. If you or someone you know has a mental illness, is struggling emotionally, or has concerns about their mental health, there are ways to get help. Use the resources linked in the description to find help for you, a friend, or a family member.